rivalry between China and the US. Because the Panama Canal is crucial to global trade, both are craving a piece of it. China has been investing in Panama, but it was the US that built the canal and ran it for decades, and now wants back in. But people in Panama do not like this idea. So let's look at how Panama and its canal got caught up in this competition. Your next smartphone or your next outfit could be passing through here, the Panama Canal. It's a shortcut between two oceans. We're talking weeks shorter than going all the way around South America, and that's especially important for the United States. Most of these ships are heading to, from or between US ports, making the US the #1 user of the canal by far. That might explain why Donald Trump is so obsessed with it.
China is operating the Panama Canal, and we're taking it back.
This is Euclides Tapia from the University of Panama.
China is the Panama Canal's second biggest user.
At the Atlantic and Pacific entrances, every ship passes two critical ports. Today, they're operated by CK Hutchison, a Hong Kong-based conglomerate. While privately owned, its ties to the mainland have raised alarms in Washington. The concern is that, in a crisis, these strategic gateways could fall under the influence of the Chinese government, giving Beijing a potential chokehold on global trade.
The Panama Canal was built by Americans for Americans, not for others.
Where did that come from? The Panama Canal, and even the state of Panama, might not exist without the US. Building the canal, the controversial US legacy in Panama time for a trip to the past. At the turn of the 20th century, President Theodore Roosevelt was determined to build a canal. When Colombia, which controlled Panama, rejected his terms, he saw another way. With a US warship offshore, the US helped Panama break away from Colombia in 1903. The deal that followed was swift. The Haibunau-Varilla Treaty granted the US rights to the canal in perpetuity. Crucially, it wasn't signed by a Panamanian, but by a Frenchman who secured terms incredibly favorable to the US, a source of resentment for generations. The US took over a failed project from the French, who had lost 20,000 lives to disease. American engineers solved the health crisis, but the construction was still a monumental task. It was mostly people from the Caribbean who actually did the dangerous work, facing discriminatory pay. The Panama Canal wound up being one of the most expensive construction projects in US history, a testament to both engineering and sacrifice. And it wasn't just US built. For decades, the Panama Canal Zone, a 10-mile-wide strip, was effectively US territory. It had its own police and courts, with US military facilities on both sides. Here, the American way of life was on full display, as Zonians lived in segregated suburbs, creating a constant source of friction with Panamanians. And if there was any doubt about who was in charge, the events of 1989 were a brutal reminder. Panama's military dictator Manuel Noriega, a one-time CIA asset, turned against Washington. The result? Citing the need to protect American lives and the canal, President George H.W. Bush launched Operation Just Cause. The U.S. invaded, toppling Noriega but leaving hundreds of civilians dead. After the invasion, Noriega was sent to a U.S. prison for drug trafficking, but hundreds of Panamanian civilians were killed. For many, the event left deep scars and a lingering distrust of American intervention.
The history of the canal has been very controversial. I think that there's always been some clashes. This relationship, built around a single strategic asset, was bound to be tense. In certain segments of the society, there's been some anti-imperialism, anti-US sentiment, a political undercurrent that has shaped the country for generations.
This is Maria Fernanda Bosmosky. She works for the Atlantic Council, a US think tank. But in 1999, the mood shifted dramatically as Panamanians were finally celebrating a moment many thought would never come. For the first time in history, Panama had complete control over the Panama Canal. It was a profound moment of national pride and a huge economic opportunity. The country was now in charge of its greatest asset. There's even a monument reminding Panamanians of the historic handshake that paved the way for sovereignty. But the treaties Panama and the US signed came with a catch, hidden within a parallel agreement. The Neutrality Treaty gives the US the right to intervene militarily if it considers the canal's security at risk. To some, it felt like true sovereignty remained just out of reach. So even after the US pulled back, it kept a foot in the door. This complex legacy created a delicate balancing act for Panama and may have left an opening for another global power, China. Which brings us to Panama's sudden diplomatic pivot. Like many places, Panama City has a Chinatown. Its archway was renovated in 2016. But what's interesting here is that Taiwan helped pay for the renovation, not China. It was a gesture of goodwill to maintain its diplomatic ties. For decades, Panama had diplomatic ties with Taiwan, because in the world of diplomacy, under Beijing's One China policy, you can only pick one. For a long time, Panama chose Taiwan partly due to US influence, and in 2017, Panama suddenly ditched Taiwan and picked mainland China. The reason was simple: economics. China is the canal's second biggest user and a global giant. Panama's government saw a future of Chinese investment and trade that Taiwan couldn't match. The decision sent shockwaves through Washington and Taipei, signaling a major geopolitical shift.
I think Panama did the right thing. It was a sovereign decision that reflects the global reality. To ignore the world's second-largest economy would be a strategic mistake for any nation, especially one so central to global trade.
This is Huayao Wang. He heads the Center for China and Globalization, a prominent Beijing think tank, and is a former advisor to the Chinese government. He argues Panama's decision was less about choosing China and more about joining the rest of the world.
It has nothing to do with China offering specific investments or quid pro quo deals. The fundamental issue is diplomatic recognition. Panama simply followed over 180 countries in acknowledging the One China principle, that there is only one sovereign state under the name of China, with its government in Beijing.
That principle is a non-negotiable cornerstone of Chinese foreign policy. For decades, Panama had been one of the few remaining countries to officially recognize Taiwan. Its diplomatic switch in 2017 was a major victory for Beijing. And while Beijing insists the decision wasn't transactional, it came shortly after Panama became the first Latin American country to join the Belt and Road Initiative. This trillion-dollar global infrastructure project is China's signature foreign policy vision, aiming to create a modern-day Silk Road of ports, railways, and highways to boost trade and economic integration. And Panama quickly received a huge diplomatic reward. In 2018, China's President Xi Jinping visited Panama and its canal, a hugely symbolic gesture. The leader of a global superpower touring the strategic waterway signaled a new era of partnership and prestige for Panama on the world stage. Beyond the high-level diplomacy, China also stepped up its soft power efforts. It opened a Confucius Institute at the University of Panama to promote Chinese language and culture. It also began offering hundreds of scholarships for Panamanian students to study in China, building goodwill and fostering connections with the country's next generation of leaders and professionals. And then there's the hard infrastructure. China has been investing heavily in Panama, including right here at the canal. For decades, only 3 bridges have spanned this vital waterway, creating significant traffic bottlenecks. Now, a 4th is being built by a consortium of Chinese state-owned companies, a massive project intended to ease congestion and boost Panama's internal logistics. But for Washington, a Chinese-built bridge so close to America's strategic backyard is more than just concrete and steel. It's seen as a potential security risk.
Physical infrastructure is their primary vector for getting into the region. It provides a commercial justification for the Chinese regime to expand its physical and political footprint. Who controls the infrastructure can eventually control the flow of goods and information. And when that footprint is right next to the Panama Canal, that is a significant concern for the United States.
This is a 21st century development project, not a 20th century geopolitical game. China is helping with local development. China is building the infrastructure that Panama needs. To interpret this as a threat is to misunderstand China's intentions. We see this as bringing purely economic benefits and shared prosperity.
But nowhere does the rivalry play out more clearly than at the canal's entrances. For years, the ports of Balboa on the Pacific and Cristobal on the Atlantic were operated by Hutchison Ports, a Hong Kong-based company. This presence was a long-standing source of anxiety for U.S. defense planners, who feared potential Chinese leverage over canal access. Then, in a sudden move that sent shockwaves through the region, a U.S.-led consortium announced it was buying the operating rights to both ports. It was a clear economic counterpunch, and it wasn't just financial. After decades of drawing down its presence since handing over the canal in 1999, the U.S. military has set foot in Panama again. This renewed military cooperation is being framed as a partnership to combat shared threats, but the underlying message is unmistakable.
The previous administration was clear. We are committed to reinforcing our partnership with Panama to counter malign influence in the region. This involves security cooperation, joint training, and intelligence sharing, particularly around the canal's security. And we are grateful that the Panamanian government has welcomed U.S. personnel back on an invitational basis to work alongside their forces.
Caught in this escalating rivalry, Panama performs a delicate balancing act. It needs Chinese investment to fuel its future growth, but it also shares deep historical, economic, and security ties with the United States. For this small nation, the challenge will be to continue navigating the treacherous waters between the two superpowers, leveraging their competition while avoiding being crushed by it. The stability of this vital choke point depends on it, all to keep its canal and its future open for business with the entire world.